Hello. Thank you, Sean. Um, so as Sean mentioned, I'm doing something a little bit different tonight. I have about 1,000 windows open, so much to the point that my presenter notes are actually handwritten because I just don't have enough screen real estate. You can also see I've got my lovely headset on because my MacBook is working so hard that if I used a normal mic, all you would hear would be the fans. I think they're just spinning up again now that the camera's on. Um, so yeah, as Sean mentioned, I'm normally behind the scenes running this sort of thing. So when the opportunity to present came up, and faced with the prospect that Keynote just kind of takes over your entire screen and you can't actually see what's going on, so I'd lose access to what's going on with the stream and everything else, I thought I'd take the opportunity to do something a little bit different. So let's start the different. And this may work well, this may look fantastic, it may also backfire spectacularly. So let me shuffle over this way a little bit. Bring up my first slide. First slide. So this talk is about vexillology, but for all of those flag aficionados tuning in, I'm really sorry, it's not actually about physical flags and their design or creation. It's more about feature flags, feature toggles, specifically building them into Swift in the modern world. But first, a little bit of background. Let's go to my second slide. I'm Rob, also known as Bok pretty much everywhere. I've done enough of these presentations over the last few years for this user group and various user groups that I probably should have a YouTube channel by now. But until then, you can find me at Bok_ on Twitter or at Bok on Slack and most other platforms. First page of notes done. Nope. We have our first string. Missing my second page of notes. Anyway. Yeah, that's weird. Anyway, so I'm a iOS contractor or a consultant, however you want to phrase that. I've picked up my first contract back in, I think it was about 2014, a short-term gig to look at some core data threading issues. That was a fun one. And I've been pretty much doing, between 6 and 12-month contracts or 2-year contracts sometimes since then. And I don't say that to try and, beef up my credentials or anything. I just wanted to put out there that I've seen a lot of code bases. And I know that pretty much one constant that's every code base I've ever worked on is eventually they try to roll their own flag solution. Almost nobody ever takes one off the shelf, even though there are some good ones that are coming up now. But it's usually they roll their own, usually some combination of the settings plist with user defaults and a few other things, maybe a JSON file sitting in the cloud somewhere. So it just gets a bit cumbersome sometimes. So when my current contract actually started going down the same path, they started making noises about feature flags and stuff as well. I had coincidentally been working on am I supposed to be on my next slide? No. Yeah, so when my current contract started working on coming up with these noises again, I decided that this time it was a good opportunity to take a step back, build something that was open source, and then so that when I inevitably move on to the next role, I can bring it with me when they then ask for it again. I didn't want to build yet another feature flag solution that I couldn't take with me. So coincidentally, around the same time, I had just been working on some command line tools similar to what Oliver just demoed, built using Swift argument parser. And it's really the confluence of those two things that is what made this possible and what made this happen. So, third slide. I've decided to name a little package called Vexil, and it is by far the best named open source product I've ever started. All the other my names I've got are usually pretty bad. This one is pretty good. So, if we move on to the next one then, so just a quick look at Swift argument parser. I was really blown away by how simple this syntax is. Like you can see that it is really just a simple struct that describes the command line arguments that you want to bring in. And then it's just a property wrapper that describes the command line argument itself, plus its definition. And that's really easy to read, really easy to understand. And then the best of all, at runtime, that just gets populated with the values that you're expecting. So there's very, very simple and straightforward. And that's really where this came from. So Oh, there's my second page. Yeah, thanks. So, all right, let's get away from my notes for a bit. And let's hope this works if I go into Xcode. All right, so I've got a very quick demo app that I've put together for this. Let's bring that up. So it's a very simple weather app that I've nicknamed Mammoth. And that's really basically it. It pulls in the current weather for each location, the weather icon, and then you can drill in and get a little bit more info. I did intend to flesh this out a little bit more for the presentation, but kind of ran out of time on that. But that's it. So it's a nice quick demo app. So you can see that my design skills leave a lot to be desired with my perfectly black and white layout with black icons and everything. So if we were to say that, these icons are a work in progress, they should probably be behind a feature flag so that they don't interrupt the user experience at the moment. So let's go and do that. We'll bring in Vexil. Now, for those of you who played with Swift Package Manager before, I didn't want to spend the next half an hour of this demo waiting for Xcode to finish resolving its package dependencies. So I've already included Vexil into the project. So if we just go, and exactly what we just saw with Swift Argument Parser. If we bring in the, so we import Vexil into our feature flags, and then I'm pretty sure it's flag cont. We create a flag container, and we'll call it feature flags. And then inside, we just add our flag definition. So we say flag. We want our default for these show icons to be false. We ask that we always have to put in a description of what the flag is, not only for yourself, but for future you who comes back and needs to understand what the bounds of this flag is, what its intent, how much is actually involved in it. We say controls whether well, let's not say that, whether the icons appear in the summary view, and we'll call it show icons, and it's going to be a boolean. But it doesn't have to be boolean. It's using generics all the way down, so it could be anything we're looking for. In this case, let's add one as well. The show-stopping demo that I've done for this before is always switching the entire app from light mode to dark mode, so why not do that? So we can use autocomplete. Let's go in and set that to color scheme. And then for now we'll make our default auto. We'll say the description is forces the app into a specific color scheme, e.g. light, dark mode. And we'll call that color scheme. And that's literally it. That's all we need to do to define some feature flags. All right. But to actually use those feature flags, we need to run them up a flagpole. So everything in Vexil works off a flagpole, the concept of a flagpole. And if we just click through to that, you can see we specialize the flagpole with a flag container. So we've just set up our feature flags flag container. And I like to put in a type alias for this so that I don't have to type flagpole with feature flags all the time. In this case, I'll call it flag service. And then the other thing that we need to do is set up an instance of that flag service. So for the sake of demo brevity, and we're not going to get into arguments about dependency injection on this stream, just going to set up a quick singleton that hoists our feature flags. Now we can access it from anywhere. It's probably one of the few cases where a singleton is probably warranted, but I'll leave that to your ideological wars. So now that we have our flag service, we need to actually start using our flag service. So if we go to our summary view model, which is the view model for each of the rows, we can see we have already set up a publish property that we're using to decide whether we show or hide the image. We go back to where that was. What we want to do is, instead of defaulting that to true, we want to set it to be our flag service dot shared build for me Xcode. I need my autocomplete. And then we can see we've got some properties on that, and this is just using dynamic member lookup to map that the structure down. So we say show icons, and that's it. That's all we need to do to actually consume that flag. Where am I? Dun, dun, dun. Cool, so if I build and run that again, we can see that the icon is gone from that, so our feature flag is working. And if I go just to prove that it's not trickery, or it could still be trickery, I guess, this could just be a recording. We'll go ahead and change that to true, rerun that, and it's back. Nice and easy. Let's change that default back before I forget. So one of the focuses of Vexil, and especially this is especially important in the Swift UI world where everything's declarative and expected to update the tree in real time, is we do actually support full real-time lookup of flags. So what we can do is I've set a nice little setup bindings method here. And if I go, where are we? Summary bindings. So we can actually access the projected property of the icon, which is actually maps into the flag itself. That's not really good from a zoom perspective. But then you can access the publisher on that flag, receive that on the main loop because we're good, and we can then drive that straight into our show icons piece. If we look at, we need to do that for our color scheme property as well. So it's the same deal. We get our color scheme, we receive it on the main loop, we map it into a native value because Swift UI doesn't like working with that enum properly, and then we just assign it into our publisher. And that's it. So that's done. What am I? 5. Yep. Content bindings. Yep. So now we have real-time updating of those flags. To make this really impressive demo, I should probably go in and add 100 more flags, but that would get really messy in here. Like, you don't want to have this be 1,000 lines long and then have to autocomplete everything all the way through. So much like Swift Argument Parser supports nested commands, we also support flag groups. So we could go in and instead of having that at the top level, we could say, have a flag group that it has flags related to the summary rows, and we can put all of our flags in there. So we call that summary, say, whoops, 2 M's, and that'll be summary flags type. So if I look at the summary flags type, you can see here's one that I prepared earlier. It is pretty much the same all the way down, just a flag container. We also have a detail screen in the app, so let's go and add that too. Not a flag, flag group. Flags related to the detail screen. Call that detail, and we'll call that detail flags. Again, same deal. You can see here as well that we can have integers set up in the summary flags. Sorry guys, I forgot to hide the simulator again. There we go. Cool, so we've got detail flags. That won't build and run though, because that now has out of date options. So I need to update this. And the same as we had before, it's just the summary is there, and then you can use the flag directly from that. So it just updates the key path on that. That would be summary as well. Now while we're here, we should probably map in our detail view. We can see that this hasn't been set up yet, so flag service.share.detail.show icons. And what's this one? Show feels like? Not that one. That one. And then we'll set up the binding for that so we can update it in real time. Cool, so we can now drive everything on that. Everything's up to date. Yep. So this is where things get really good. Most existing flag solutions, as I mentioned before, usually store something in the settings plist that you might conditionally include in, say, a development build or internal testing build. But that means that the barrier of entry for adding additional flags is kind of high. Like you've got to, if you say you have a feature toggle class, you might add a property on that which maps to a user default. And so you need to set all that up, and then you need to go into the settings plist and add the mapping there, and then hope you've got the spelling consistent across them all. It's a bit cumbersome, and it kind of raises the barrier to actually creating new flags. And one of the things we wanted to do with Vexil was the barrier is one line. You define that flag, and you can use it and edit it, and everything is there. So to do that, Vexil actually will generate its own flag editing UI in SwiftUI. So let's go in and add that. Let's say you wanted to add a super secret button to your app itself, which I really don't recommend because you probably shouldn't be shipping this with your app. But let's say, I'll bring the simulator back for a sec. But let's say we wanted to add just a button in the top right-hand corner. That's like a settings button. Add the simulator away. Let's go in here and we'll say content button. Come on. So we've just added a button to the navigation bar that toggles the show settings state up the top. It has the little gear SF image setup. We obviously need to add now that we're going to show the settings, we want to show the settings just as a typical modal content sheet. So very quick modal that uses the binding of the show settings tool to show the navigation view with this stuff in it. And then all we actually need to do is Vexil also ships with a second module called Vexillographer, which is the person who designs flags. We're editing flags, so this is pretty close. We say Vexillographer, and then we need to initialize that with the flagpole. So we have our flag service for that. So shared, and we need to tell which flag value source we're editing. So in this case, it's user defaults, the standard user defaults. And that's all we need then to build an entire editing interface. So if we build and run that, cool. So our Mammoth is back. You can see our little edit gear icon in the top corner with our secret settings section, which is not really that secret. But we can go in there and we can say, cool, in the summary, you'll see that we have the description that you've entered. So bring that back up over here. The description that you've entered. And if we toggle that on and then dismiss that, you'll see that our flags have updated in real time because we use the publisher to map it into the observable object. So SwiftUI re-rendered that view. And we now have the icons back. Let's go and turn that off for now. We can also, as we saw before, we can use the color scheme. Now, our color scheme definition is just an enum. You probably can't see that behind the sim. So our color scheme definition is just an enum. It's a case iterable enum, which means that Vexillographer is able to generate a UI for that. In which case, it just generates a standard picker that you can go in and say, hey, let's switch everything to dark mode. Switches everything to dark mode. So one of the things that we also support is a little info button that you can see. Now what most flag providers or specialty flag outlets don't want you to know is that, well, they probably don't care. But most flag solutions it's just a key value store. You have a string key and you have a value that's attached to it, and that can go into any database anywhere, really. And so Vexil is no different. We generate a key for each property, and then we have the description that you see so that a tester can read the description of the flag and what where the flag applies to and all of that sort of stuff without having to come back and ask you about it. You can see the current value of that in the user defaults.standard because that's what we're editing. We can clear the value in the current source, and this becomes particularly important when you look at the source hierarchy, because Vexil supports a hierarchy of different sources. So you can see that it's dark because the top one says it's dark. If I do it to clear that, we can see that it's gone back to the default value now. And you could insert any number of ones in there. In fact, you can insert quite a few. So this is I don't say a fairly typical setup, but you can have a local snapshot where you've overridden things. You could have your user defaults, so you've got local testing going on. You might have an environment selector that lets you, say you've got a test environment or a pre-production environment or production environment. You could have different configurations that are automatically updated in that. And then you might have a remote flag provider like Firebase Remote Config or something like that. And then it comes back to the default values. And it's literally just walks the array and returns the first non-nil value that's in there to decide what that value of that flag is at any one time. So if I close that off again, if we go back to simulator still up good, let me just clear this out because this is a problem that I always forget to do. Now, that's all well and good, but we really recommend that you don't put, finish that page. Cool, I'm going well with my notes. So we really recommend that you don't put the vexillographer stuff inside your shipping app. Obviously you then have to limit when and where it can be included, who has access to it, all of that sort of stuff. Instead, it's actually really easy using app groups to ship it as a separate app. So the same app groups that you use to, let me kill off the simulator again. Wish it did that automatically for me. The same capabilities that you use to talk to your extensions, like a Today extension or a widget, if that's what you're building. You just configure your app with a app group entitlement and the name of the app group, and then you can create a second app. In this case, I've created a second app called Sloth, because everybody who's seen Ice Age knows that Mammoth's friends with Sloth. They both share the same app group here. And then if we actually go into our app group configuration, to access the user defaults that are stored in that app group, you just copy that same app group name into your suite name. Which means now that we could go into our flag service, we can pass in our sources, and it just takes an array of sources. By default, it's just the user defaults.standard. So if this time we'll go user defaults.appgroup. And now if I rerun Mammoth now, actually that's not going to show you anything. Let's run Sloth instead. So if I go to that and I run Sloth, cool, you can see we've now got Sloth. Sloth, the code behind Sloth itself is literally just the same navigation view list inside of it, and the vexillographer thing, which I think you can see. Yep, literally just the same vexillographer setup that's inside our source. It just has the app group source instead of the other one, which reminds me I should update that over here too. So we can change this stuff in our second app group, just as we did in the other one. Dun, 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 dun. Then if we rerun Mammoth, we can see our weather icon is back. And we can have a look here and see that it is coming from the not standard user defaults. So that means that you could, for example, ship your production app as normal to the App Store, but then when you could also ship your secondary app, the settings app, whatever you want to call it, via test flight to specific users. And then the two can share their feature toggle. So you can use the secondary app to edit the primary app's feature toggles. So, and that's also good for not putting your secret stuff inside the app itself. Cool. And so there's one last thing that I wanted to demo. The real-time feature flag support inside Vexil is fun, but it's not just for fun. There's some really good stuff that you can actually do with it, depending on if you get a remote flag provider like Firebase Remote Config. You could set up push notifications so that it automatically updates the values of the flags on your device. So there was one service that I've used before called Launch Darkly. This is a paid service. Just move that over there. It's a paid service, and it's probably more on the enterprise level than it is a hobbyist tool. But they do have a 30-day trial, which makes for a fantastic demo in this case. So you can see that if I bring the simulator back for just a sec, so you can see that if I go into the summary, the show icons one, we've got the summary.showIcons key here. So if I just set that up in LaunchDarkly as well, I can now, but first, before I go into that, I need to actually go in and add it. So I added a LaunchDarkly provides a iOS SDK, and I've gone and added the support for it to Vexil. And to do that, there's a very simple protocol. All we really need to provide is the name of the flag value source, which is what we put into Vexillographer. And then it's a getter, a setter, and if you want to support real time, a publisher. And that's literally all that you need to provide additional whatever your key value store is that you want to support, like Firebase Remote Config, DynamoDB, SQL database, if that's what you're after. It's really just up to you. Very simple to provide. So I've done that for LaunchDarkly. So if I add that in as a secondary one, what's it called again? LaunchDarkly. That's right. So just add that in. And let's rerun Mammoth now. So if we go in, we can see that, and it'd be helpful if I bring the window back up. We can see that the show icons summary, LaunchDarkly has it as false, which, I'll zoom in, so we can see that's false. So it's pulling those down from LaunchDarkly now. So if I clear that, we go back to that home screen. So in Mammoth now, if I were to come into LaunchDarkly and turn this feature toggle on, pretty much straight away it's now set up and it's pushed out. So anybody who has the app open gets it in real time. I could go crazy with my favorite demo and just set everyone on the planet to dark mode. And it just updates. We're not mean though, so we'll turn that off. And that's it. That's everything that I've got. Right, so where's that button? Come back to me. So that's it. This is, as I said at the start, it's an open source project, probably one of the better ones that I've built actually. It's very well documented and it's very well tested. Available on GitHub at that URL there. I can never do this. No, this way. There we go, that URL there. I'll paste the link in Slack as well. And that's it. I'll be around for a while tonight if anybody has any questions. Otherwise, back to you, Sean.